Welcome to Aging Insight with your host, John Ross and Lisa Scholmeyer. This program is made possible by
Welcome everyone to Aging Insights. I'm Lisa Scholmeyer here with John Ross, and hopefully you've tuned into our show each week and you know that you get some great information here because we talk about things like maintaining your independence through your retirement years, keeping yourself from being a burden on friends and family, and preserving those assets that you're going to need to get you through that retirement period and leaving a legacy to family and others after you're gone. And that's what Aging Insight is all about.
Yeah, and we know that as elder law attorneys, we know that it takes a combination of health, housing, financial, and legal. Legal is just one piece of it, but all of these other things interrelate to all of these issues. And of course, one of those issues, being that we are in fact attorneys and stuff, but even within the law, you've got all of these different types of law that impact you as you deal with these sort of issues. Tax law, estate planning like wills and trusts and guardianships and powers of attorney, government benefits law, lots of different types. And one of those types is real estate.
Right, real estate. A lot of folks figure that they really haven't, to live the American dream, they've had to purchase a little piece of America. And, a lot of families, they have a lot of connection to the old home place where their grandfather or great-grandfather, came out from Georgia and farmed him a, 80-acre plot of land somewhere up near Foreman, Arkansas, and really bootstrapped their family and provided for that family through the Depression and the war years, and that little piece of America is just very important to that family. And of course our homes that we've purchased and maybe paid off that 30-year mortgage, that's all very important to us.
That's right. And one of the problems you can run into with all of this is multiple ownership. And to give you an extreme example, let me tell you a story about one of a client that I had, and this was many years ago. But this woman called and she said, well, I own some property here locally, about 20 acres, and she said, I would like to deed it to my grandson. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. Come on in and let's sit down and visit. And so, the time for the appointment comes and this lady shows up, and she is about 92, 93 years old. She's still in pretty good shape, but as good a shape as you can be in at 92 or 93 years old. She comes in, she sits down, and she says, yeah, I've got my 20 acres out there, and there's a house on it, and that's where I live, but my grandson's been helping me out for many years, and I've decided, the easiest thing would just be to deed him the property. And I said, okay, well, that's no problem. Drawing up a deed is very simple. I said, all I need is a copy of your deed where you got the property. And she says, ooh, well, that's a problem. And I said, okay. She said, well, here's the deed that I have. And she reaches down and she digs in her purse and she brings out this crumply yellow piece of paper that is just practically turning to powder as you touch it. And she says, yeah, the deed is actually in my grandfather's name. Now, remember, I'm talking to a woman who's 93 years old. The last deed to this property was her grandfather receiving the property. And when we fold this thing out, it's dated in the 1800s. That's when he got the property. And so I said, well, okay, so was he married at some point, I presume? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, I guess one of their kids would have been your mother? And she said, yeah. I said, well, did your mother have any brothers and sisters? And she said, oh yeah, my grandparents, they had 12 kids. And so I'm thinking, okay, when this 20 acres, when mom and dad, her grandparents died, that property was divided among all 12 of them. And I said, well, how about your mother? Did you have any brothers and sisters? And she says, yeah, I had 6 brothers and sisters. And I said, well, how many of your aunts and uncles are alive? Well, none of them are alive. Did they all have kids? Yes, many of them had 3, 4, 5 kids. And so that same 20 acres that she wanted to come in and deed to her grandson, once we started kind of drawing it out, it looked like that one piece of property had probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 100 separate owners.
Okay,
Whoops.
so in that particular situation, now John, one of the first questions people will say to that is, well, the little lady you were speaking to, she lived there.
That's right, she lived there.
I bet she paid the taxes.
She's been paying the taxes.
So isn't it her property?
It is not.
Yeah.
In fact, there's all these rumors. You hear, there are laws out there called adverse possession,
Yes.
where if I, for example, move into your house and I won't let you in, and you're banging on the door, but I won't let you in, and instead you just basically don't do anything, and instead, you could go to the court and have me evicted, but you just don't. Well, if I do that for long enough, if
you squat at
if
that
I
property,
squat at that property for long enough, I could petition a court under the adverse possession laws and have that property taken. But it is very, very hard to prove an adverse possession, because if, for example, if I have a house and I just say, oh, Lisa, you can live in the house.
okay.
So I'm not trying to kick you out. I'm allowing you to live there. Well, then it's not adverse. It's
Right.
just possession.
It's just possession. So
Um,
So in this case, arguably, this little lady was living in this house on this 20 acres with the full consent and agreement of all these cousins.
That's right. And the fact that she's been paying the property taxes and putting up a new fence and all of that, arguably, that's just her rent.
Yeah.
In
So-
fact, I think they could all probably make a pretty good argument that she owes them some extra money.
Yeah.
She is, considering she only owned about a 1/72nd interest in the property.
Yeah.
So we see this all the time, where people have a piece of property that maybe they just own 50-50 with a brother or a cousin or somebody. Or we see these problems where they literally do have tens or even hundreds of separate owners because it's been so long since the property has been transferred. So what do you do with these things? How do you resolve these title ownership issues? That's our topic today. And so we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm Larry Sims. It's been my privilege for the past several years to be a volunteer board member of Hospice of Texarkana, and there I'm able to represent community members like you. We continually customize our end-of-life care to better meet the needs of our community. As an example, our medical director and nurse practitioner still make visits to homes and facilities. Call today to learn more about the help we can give your family. Hospice of Texarkana, the nonprofit hospice established in 1985 for the community, by the community.
The Wadley Senior Clinic has been such a blessing for our family. Because they specialize in geriatric care, they take the time to really focus on Dad's needs. Their exam rooms are specially designed for seniors, and they offer lab and x-ray on site. With monthly educational programs on health and wellness of the mind and body, our healthcare questions get answered. Best of all, they accept Dad's Medicare benefits. See what the Wadley Senior Clinic can do for you. Wadley Senior Clinic, where healthy relationships begin.
Welcome back to Aging Insight. I'm John Ross here with Lisa Schulmeyer, and today on Aging Insight we're talking about property that has multiple owners, and sometimes you'll hear this referred to as heir property, but oftentimes it's where maybe say mom and dad have passed away and they've left a piece of property to their 3 kids. Now they didn't leave this piece to this kid, this piece to this kid, and this piece to this kid. They left the whole thing to the 3 children. So they own an equal, undivided interest in the property. And if they then don't divide it, then when one of them dies, their kids will own an undivided interest in this. And then their kids, and then their kids, and so on and so forth. And this can get awfully complicated, and it can start causing some problems.
Yes, it certainly can. You know, the one of the issues with heir property is a lot of folks, they know in their minds that they have an interest in some property, and you know, often the person I'm talking to is the person who continues to pay the taxes on the property, but knows that they have a fractional share of ownership with cousins, aunts, uncles, whomever. This can become an issue when we start dealing with someone's long-term care needs and they are looking at applying for some VA benefits or some Medicaid benefits, because any real estate that you own is considered an asset. But yet, if you are one of 20 heirs who own a piece of property, you know, it's not like you can sell the piece of property and get it out of your name to assist with your care. You know, the title company doesn't know who owns the property. We'd have to get 20 people's permission to sell the property, so it becomes a real issue. It's still your asset, or you know, for some portion of it, but your hands are tied and you can't do anything with it. So that is a problem.
And especially when you're talking about something like Medicaid, I mean, it can be the difference between you getting the care you need and you not getting the care you need. The other person that can be involved in all of this is the other side of it. You know, maybe somebody else is over there paying the taxes on the property, but they then think that gives them the right, since they're paying the taxes on it, they can cut the $40,000 worth of timber off of it and pocket all that money, even though you own a third. Or maybe they're occupying the residence on there and they're living there for free, but yes, they're paying the taxes. And so you can get some animosity in here. You can create some other issues, and so it can get really messy really fast. Now, first thing I wanted to point out with what you said is, if you're going to try to resolve this, one way to resolve it is if you've got everybody involved and
Right.
everybody's on the same page and agreeing.
And you know, a lot of times if we're just a generation back from having a proper transfer on that property, you often will know who the other joint owners are on the property. But if it's a generation or two ago, it was the last transfer, like your situation, many times, you know, it's almost a family legend at this point that, you know, you own a portion of the property up there, but you certainly don't know who all the other owners are. So, you know, one of the first things to consider is, do you have information about who the other likely owners are? And if you don't, need to do some family history work and see if we can figure that out.
That's right. If it is clear, you know, if for example, mom and dad have left their 3 kids an undivided interest, it's always possible that those 3 kids could then go, for example, and have the property surveyed. And, you know, you take the square and then you cut the square into 2, you know, with 2 lines, and now you've got 3 rectangles. And, you know, the kids could each deed to each other their respective 1/3 of that property. Now, instead of having one property that is jointly owned by all 3 of them, they each have an individually owned piece. And that can work out well if everybody is agreeable. Now, oftentimes to do that, depending on the property itself, it may involve the use of a surveyor to go out there and draw some lines. You know, Lisa, this is one that I'll get occasionally, just this week as a matter of fact, where I had some folks come in and they say, well, you know, here's this piece of land that our dad owned, and it's this kind of wompy-jawed, rectangle-y thing.
Yeah, L-shaped.
L-shaped, and there's like 3 kids, and they say, well, we want to divide this up. We're all in agreement, and Billy's just going to have the part that's kind of northwest of the pond, and I'm going to have the piece that's between the pond and the barn, and then Sally's going to have everything to the other side of the barn. I can't write that in a deed.
Yes.
So you do have to actually go out, and yes, you're going to have to spend some money with a surveyor or something like that. But I promise you, even though surveyors can be a little pricey, the expense of getting that cleared up now, as opposed to the expense of fixing it later, no comparison.
Yeah, so, you know, it's one of these situations where if everybody's in agreement, you know, we can accomplish a lot if everyone is in agreement. The problem is when you get into this heir property, even if you know who all the heirs are, and so you reach out and contact them to try to get an agreement, perhaps to either ask them to quit claim an interest, or that you are allowed to purchase their interest in the property. You know, we get to a point where often, you know, people think that their interest in a piece of property is worth a lot more than it really is, because just some magical thinking, you know, that they think that their, you know, 1/16th share of a 40-acre tract in Little River County, Arkansas is all of a sudden priceless, because now someone's coming to them and asking them to sell that interest. And what that does is usually creates some anger, and a lot of times we don't end up with an agreement on resolving the ownership of that property. And when we don't have an agreement, then your last alternative is to actually go to the courts and ask the courts to determine the ownership and partition that property on your behalf. And the court will be glad to do that. It takes just a little time and a lot of money to get it accomplished.
Yeah, partition can be difficult, and there's a whole lot of other pieces to that puzzle. But I think what we'll do is we'll take another break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about how you'd go about that and what exactly that looks like. And maybe that'll make some of you who are in this position a little more agreeable. We'll be right back.
As things get older, they require more care. This car and I have seen a lot of miles together, but because I take care of her, she runs just like she did in 1955. That's why I chose the Wadley Senior Clinic, with an individualized care plan designed just for me and a convenient location off Jefferson Avenue. They have everything to keep me running like new. It's not about the miles, it's about the journey. Let the Wadley Senior Clinic keep you happy, healthy, and cruising down the road of life.
Hi there, I'm Larry Sims. It's been my privilege for the past several years to be a volunteer board member of Hospice of Texarkana, and there I'm able to represent community members like you. We continually customize our end-of-life care to better meet the needs of our community. As an example, our medical director and nurse practitioners still make visits to homes and facilities. Call today to learn more about the help we can give your family. Hospice of Texarkana, the nonprofit hospice established in 1985 for the community, by the community.
Welcome back to Aging Insight. I'm Lisa Scholmeyer here with John Ross, and today we're talking about real estate, and particularly we're talking about real estate that maybe has passed down in the family, but there has not been any sort of probates or official deeds that have been done, but everybody just sort of knows that this is family land, and they consider it heir property. Heir property, John, not being a legal term, but yet a very common one in this area. And this is a piece of property where you might own with several other family members. And we talked about if you know who all the other owners are, and you can try to come to some agreement as to how to divide this property or the ownership of this property, that's just great. But there are times, many times, when either we don't know who all the owners are, or even if we do, we can't come to an agreement on dealing with the property, and now maybe we have some reason that we really need to deal with this. You know, John, we've often seen this with the oil and gas exploration,
Yes.
where landmen and there's people out there and there's some drilling and all going on. Suddenly people get real interested in determining their ownership in this
Absolutely.
property. So So what about this process of
Right. So
dealing with
the
it?
first thing is, especially if you're talking about property that is passed down multiple generations, you know, the one of the things that kind of I chuckle to myself sometimes when people are talking to me is they'll say, "Oh yeah, you know, this 40 acres, you know, Granddad, I mean, he left that to my mom and my uncle, and then my mom left it to me, and my uncle left it to his kid, and so me and my cousin own the property." And I say, "Well, did y'all do any sort of probate or anything?" And they'll say, "Well, no, we didn't have to." Well, the problem is that that last deed is still in Grandpa's name. So oftentimes when you're faced with this property that has transitioned several generations like that especially, you have two options. One, you could try to go in and probate all of those estates, but that would be so prohibitively expensive that it's just not reasonable. Now, you can sometimes do things called affidavits of heirship, where you try to write all of that in, who is related to who, and you get to the bottom, and here's who own it, and you can record that at the courthouse. But frankly, although those are easy, because they're easy, they're not well received by title companies and things like that. So oftentimes you end up having to do some sort of suit at the courthouse in order to officially determine your ownership. And this is often a suit to quiet title, or a suit to create title, to say, I own some piece of this, although there's no record.
Right.
And so I'm asking the court to confirm my 1/5 ownership or my 1/10 ownership. So that's the first part of it, is proving that you own it.
Right, and in that in that suit to quiet title process, the court may appoint a court surveyor or a court magistrate to do some investigation into the situation, and to get surveys and things done to the property. And of course, those are expenses of the lawsuit. So
that's right, and because you're claiming an ownership which may be against somebody else who is also claiming that same ownership. If you're claiming that you own 1/3, but there's 3 other people that are all claiming that they own 1/4, then you can't own 1/3 if 3 people own 1/4. And so oftentimes when you bring that suit, not only are you going to have to notify these other people, but if there are others out there, the court may appoint another attorney to represent the unknown owners, or the undiscovered owners. And of course, all of these expenses are getting paid by you because you brought the lawsuit, or they're going to be against the land.
Yeah.
And all of this is just to determine who owned it.
Right, and oftentimes, John, when I get this family situation with this property, the reason we're in this spot is because generations prior, didn't do any kind of probate or official action on the property because they thought it was too expensive.
Right.
And at this point, believe me, the cost of dealing with this and clearing up this title, is much more expensive than it would have been to just do it earlier.
Right, and then the other part of this, so even once you've determined your ownership, the other thing is, like, for example, I'll have 4 kids that own 20 acres undivided, but the person I'm talking to keeps referring to their 5 acres. Their 5 acres. This is my 5 acres. And they're talking about a square of 5 acres that they've always considered theirs. They may even live on it.
Right.
And so they keep referring to it as their 5 acres, when in fact all they own is 1/4 of the whole. And so they say, well, I want to go to the courthouse and have the judge cut my 5 acres off. Well, when you go to the court, you can ask for a partition. And a partition is where the court takes property that has multiple owners and turns it into separate individual properties.
Separate individual properties of appropriate value, equal value.
Right, because there's actually 2 ways that the court can partition. They can do what's called a partition in kind. And this is what the client expects. The client expects the judge to go out there with a surveyor's wheel and one of those little scopes and cut off their 5 acres and then hand them a deed to their 5 acres. But judges don't like to do that. In fact, judges often, when it comes to real estate, they will say that it's very difficult, if not impossible in many cases, for them to partition that sort of thing fairly. The one thing they can do fairly is sell that property on the courthouse steps and divide the cash.
Yes, dollars are easy to divide.
Unfortunately, when you sell property on the courthouse steps, oftentimes you get a lot less than what you thought you were going to get. It's public auction, and it's going to go for whatever it goes for.
Right, and you as an owner of that property, you can certainly go bid on the property, but you might get outbid.
That's exactly right. So, all that to say, clean these things up as soon as you can, because somebody, like Elisa said, somebody thought it was too expensive when they were dealing with it, and they have put that burden on you. If you think it's too expensive now, it's not getting any cheaper later on down the road. It just gets worse and worse. And all the way back to that lady that came in to deed her property to her grandson, I had to tell her that it would be more expensive to go buy another, it would be cheaper to buy another 20 acres instead of trying to figure out the ownership. So it'll go so far that you will ultimately lose all rights to it. So take care of your business out there. And of course, if you have other questions or you want a little more detail, you can always give us a call during our radio program, which is every Saturday on 98.5, and that's live at noon. You can also catch this episode and past episodes of Aging Insight, both the radio and the TV show, on aginginsight.com. And you can always pick up one of our magazines out there. And next time you're sitting in your doctor's office, look around and see if you find one. And if you don't, you give me a call, and I'll make sure there's one the next time you show up at that doctor's office. But otherwise, we'll see you next week for a brand new episode.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Aging Insight program with John Ross and Lisa Scholmeyer. This program is made possible by